Welcome to the GovDiscovery AI podcast with Mike Shanley, your source for actionable insight into government markets and foreign policy. GovDiscovery AI leverages a decade of experience winning federal funding to deliver intel to sales, proposal, and capture teams working in defense and civilian markets. Now here's your host, Mike Shanley.
Hello and welcome to the GovDiscovery AI podcast. I'm your host, Mike Shanley. Excited today to have Sunny Wescott, Chief Meteorologist at the Department of Homeland Security, as our guest here today to discuss national security and meteorology. I'm very interested to get into this. And Sunny, thank you for being here. Excited to hear from you on this episode.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I'm definitely very well versed in all of these topics from my various backgrounds. And I will say that I am speaking as Sunny, the scientist, not necessarily on the behalf of the Department of Homeland Security or the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, but as a subject matter expert in this capacity.
Thank you very much for that. And we appreciate you coming on in that capacity as a scientist. So let's jump right into it. Sunny, what is the role of meteorology in homeland and national security?
Yeah, so we have a really big intricacy that ends up being weather events, all of our ability to move, our ability to fly, our ability to drive, ports, our ability to do operations in the sense of people movements, troop movements, supply drops, the tank deployments even. It's everything from the military operations as my time as a prior Air Force forecaster, all the way through search and rescue teams now in disaster planning. It's the mitigation, the preparedness, and the gaps and the interdependencies that end up being showcased on the tail end of a disaster, where you really need to lean into the communities in order to build that restoration, that trust back up as you're working to build in all of that community restoration level.
Great. So we're going to get into a lot more of that detail, but we want to check in right now is just high-level trends. Last week, you spoke at the Cooperative Cyber Tech 2025 conference. Love to hear, first of all, what you spoke on, and then get into a bit of what were the other key conversations and priority topics at that Cyber Tech conference.
Yeah, so the CyberTech conference, actually, that connection grew out of GridSecCon last year, where I talked about the implications of extreme weather events on energy infrastructure, everything from transmission lines to substations, nuclear power plants, and the impact that the water security, the water cycle, major flooding events, everything from damaging wind, tornadoes, hail, on that sector, which then led into what does that look like for AI? What does that look like for data centers? What does it look like for cryptocurrency mining, which was a big part of the conversation, Bitcoin? So I did a lot of research on finding out what reservoirs some of these areas are located near, how they're getting their water for cooling, what kind of risks they're going to face in the future. I got to listen in on some of the conversations about where we can be utilizing AI, not only just to move forward in the progression of technology, but to move forward in a better manner, to be able to better pick sites for development, to be able to better engage with all of the different sectors on topics to make it applicable to them. We also had a soldering lab, which was really cool. I didn't partake in that, but I did get to watch it. They had escape rooms. They had everything from how to build your own AI. So they were doing database developments to conversations on burnout and how to keep things going in the workplace, how to be a better manager. So the cybersecurity side of it was actually incredibly expansive as a conference, and I really enjoy getting to touch into so many different sectors and share how weather impacts them.
Yeah, it seems like that's a very broad perspective on cybersecurity. Being a subject matter expert in this space, what was something that surprised you to hear being discussed at the conference?
There was a lot of just general conversations when we have on developing AI and the fact that we need to just embrace AI. We need to put AI in everything. Is some of these companies, that's their big push, is it should just be in everything. It makes it easier to operate, makes it faster, it makes everything more efficient in general. But then the response coming down to, we don't have enough water in the areas that they're developing in. They're not developing with the mindset of drought in the future, the implications of the supply chain. What is capable of being built where are we overdeveloping, and seeing some of the risks going forward. So there was a lot of conversation being had about future concepts planning, but without the secondary part of how do we do that better? And so it was engaging both sides of the brain, it seemed, in every conversation. So I will say it was a little exhausting being able to jump from one conversation to another, but it did seem like everybody had one piece of the puzzle amongst them. And so having these bigger conversations really did help paint the full picture of who's using it for what. We had talks about everything about what's going on right now internationally. So not everything was even cyber. Some of it was just completely focused on what would happen if a nuclear war were to kick off? What would happen if the supply chain crumbled in this region? So it's very expansive.
I'm interested to get into some more of that, but let's keep going big picture here for a second. What are those meteorological threats right now to U.S. national security, specifically interested in Department of Defense operations and military readiness?
We have so much when it comes to the way of Department of Defense and weather. So it's everything from new drones that are coming out. They can't fly in certain weather conditions. Smaller drones can't fly in even more weather conditions. Underwater drones can't handle certain conditions either. So when you're doing your meteorological forecast, it needs to be for all aspects of operations. The human body in and of itself can't handle high heat index levels over a certain threshold. We can't acclimate to that. If the ground is oversaturated in a region from a recent flooding event and you go to move supplies in, it's important to understand that at that point, your troops may be stuck babysitting some of these supplies because they can't get them out. They're too heavy, they sink into the ground, and now you have to wait for the ground to dry. It can change everything from where you're flying, how you're flying, what you're dropping, where you're dropping it, to the general safety and well-being of your equipment and your people. So it's a conversation you have with every pilot. Before they take off, they have to know the weather conditions, where they're at, where they're going, everywhere in between, the drop zone forecasts. There's massive amounts of research that gets done by each forecaster in the military, from the Air Force through the Navy and the Marines. And we get to work together to share those nuggets to create a nice interwoven picture for operations, both national and abroad.
So I listen to a lot of history podcasts, and a big issue historically for military operations has been weather. It's difficult to operate in wintertime. In springtime, everyone gets bogged down. It's clear that's not just a historical phenomenon. However, has how weather affects military operations changed over the years, or in a lot of ways, is it really still the same?
We definitely have a better picture of what's going on and where it's going on. Integrated automated weather sensors, better satellite imagery, greater resolution in satellite imagery, better model predictives as we go forward. The sharing of data sets country to country also plays a large role. So we're able to create far better forecasts further out now. So it's a lot more reliable to understand the changes in the atmosphere as they've been occurring. So from World War II, we were often surprised by cloud cover that would come in. We didn't really have trend analysis done for a lot of these areas because we didn't have satellite imagery that went back, this extensive period of time we now have to be able to say a fog bank typically rolls in this window to this window. The winds usually blow from this way to this way. There and by, we should be aware of this threat and this threat. Now we have these. So we're able to say we have a better understanding of wave heights. We have a better understanding of the speed of storms. The Texas deep freeze event that hit the U.S., for example, went across the entire northern hemisphere 5 more times as a set, fully depth low. And we were able to track it as it crossed every continent across the northern hemisphere, went across mountain ranges, dropped tornado outbreaks, flash flooding events, major windstorms. And as it came back to the U.S. about a month and a week and a half apart from the last time it was here, we were able to get a really good understanding of just how long it takes these storms to progress around the merry-go-round that is the jet stream.
We talked about drones, and I would assume it's wind events, it's cloud cover. I'd be interested in getting into more detail though there on how does meteorology, why is that important for both protecting against drone attacks as well as using them on the offensive?
Yeah, so during a very heavy downpouring rainfall event or frequent lightning or hail or winds over 35 miles per hour, you don't have to worry about certain drones. They're unable to handle the amount of turbulence, the amount of push-pull that the atmosphere does. Their sensors are degraded. The camera systems are degraded. Visibility-wise, you also run into the issues during either heavy rain or heavy snow, as well as fog. So this removes a threat from your threat matrix during that portion of the window. As soon as you see you're going to have clear skies, no notable winds for 3 to 4 days, that becomes evident for everybody who might be looking. So you're able to look at another country, you're able to look at yourself, you're able to look at state to state and say, I know I'm going to have good weather from here to here, which also then leaves me open to if somebody was going to fly, that anything now could fly, as opposed to just looking for a big threat, which is far easier to spot. Small threats can make it very, depending on the small threat, they can make it very far in against some radar systems. So if you don't have a radar system in because you're operating either within the US or you're operating a private sector chain in another country, you're not going to know that somebody's flying overhead, taking pictures of your site or scanning your site or tracking where your security systems are, mapping out your infrastructure. So weather plays a major role in all new forms of aviation as well as old ones. As the atmosphere gets taller and as it gets hotter, it will get even more unstable with turbulence as well. So single engine aircraft are a really big risk now for being unable to handle some of the clear air turbulence. And then our larger aircraft can't carry as much. So our cargo is starting to take a hit too.
What role after a weather event is disinformation an issue in accurately diagnosing what weather's impact was in an event? I don't know, we can maybe take the recent blackouts in Portugal and Spain as an example.
My inbox took a pretty notable surge during that power outage where people saw the news saying it was some anomalous weather event, it was some space weather event, it was some once in a lifetime compression of the atmosphere, amplification of the atmosphere, surge of something that because you're able to say you wouldn't see it because it's atmospheric, thereby you can't turn it away as a possibility. It bought them time for whoever was putting out that story. And again, not to say that anyone within the meteorological agencies in the other country were saying it, because they were not. They were very adamant it was not a weather threat. It wasn't something that, you know, meteorologically had an amplifier even to it. So we had to immediately beat out misinformation because the question was, if it was atmospheric, could that repeat here in the US? Could it repeat in China? Could it repeat in Russia? How could this be manipulated going forward? And so that became a huge problem for an immediate surge of concern, as opposed to there was a surge in the grid system and the full explanation, which came about a day later. And it was just the trade-off of energy, the overwhelming of the system, a bunch of essentially the triggers triggering. And we did what it was supposed to do. Should there have been something like a coronal mass ejection in partial safeguarding of systems through shutdown? However, with all misinformation, we get scams on the back end of disasters. Sometimes we get these major concerns where people think that there's a weather machine out there and they start attacking certain things like our weather radar stations. Again, if there was a way for anyone to control the weather, there would be a utopia somewhere that is unimpacted by weather, that is operating at full capacity, and their people don't suffer floods, tornadoes, hail, the destruction that is occurring in every major country and our underdeveloped countries as well at greater and greater rates. So it's every aspect from conspiracy theories through general misinformation, through scams about government funding, government handouts on the back end of a disaster. Click here to get money for your house having been destroyed, and it's actually a scam to take what's left of your money and take advantage of the situation, which is awful. But it is an expansive problem.
Well, let's get into more detail on the threats and ways to mitigate the threats to infrastructure, both in the U.S. as well as DoD resources globally. How do you approach that conversation?
So there's so many different ways that you can mitigate. You can mitigate the site, you can mitigate with security, you can mitigate with staff, you can mitigate with society, you can mitigate with supply chains. So there's all these fun S's that are out there. I've noted that a lot of them start with S's, which makes it a lot more fun to be able to break them up. So when we're talking about strategizing, what can you do for the least amount of money where? So a lot of people come at the back end of a presentation or an exercise and say, okay, so I know this is going to hit me. What do I do? Will you give me money so that I can pay to do the thing today? What should I do if I was given money today to do the thing? So we have everything from, changing the albedo, which is the coloring of the infrastructure from maybe a dark color to a brighter color so it doesn't absorb as much heat. We have everything from flood barrier systems, but if you do one, that you should communicate to the communities around you so that you're not now being the cause of flood where you would have been the lowest lying area. Now you're surging floodwater into somewhere else. We have everything from you should elevate your infrastructure. You should not put the new batteries for home systems in the basements because we learned that doing that with generators was a bad idea. So it's learning from the past. It's learning with the materials in the future. It's changing building codes to advocate for the most resilient critical sites, manufacturing sites, nuclear sites, as well as communities, homes, and operations in general.
How important is disaster preparedness then? What can you do before the disasters? You kind of mentioned some things, what to do immediately before if you know a weather system is coming, but as well as long-term disaster preparedness, what are some of the cost-effective investments, both for the U.S. as well as for our allies globally, that can make them more resilient to future weather events?
Yeah, so there is the unfortunate notion that what has been put in motion is in motion at this point. So the weather events will continue to get worse, and therein by it is incumbent on everybody. That is, again, all those fun S's that we just went over. It's incumbent on everyone to be able to be okay until help can arrive, which in many cases can be far more than 3 days. And it's 3 days so that you get food and water. It's not 3 days until you're made whole again. So the goal isn't to wait until the thing is destroyed, your home, the bridge, the road, the power plant, because the destruction and the cascade, the delays that come there and by are elongating. We're noting now that on the need for transformers, in some areas, the larger transformers can take 5 to 7 years on back order. So if an area takes massive damage and they don't have backups on hand because it was too expensive, where were they going to house them? That's going to be a major pain point for the community to not be able to see restoration quickly. If you want to safeguard your home, you need to put in the investments now. And I understand that that's an immediate cost that comes out of needing flood barrier systems. How are you going to pay for that? You can barely afford groceries. And unfortunately, it is our lower income communities that get hit the hardest. We have communities that are very well integrated with HUD, and HUD puts out a lot of low income housing assistance programs through LIHEAP. And we try to advocate you should look into LIHEAP. Whether or not, your pride is involved doesn't really matter. The last thing that you want is to become displaced in a disaster, because it will be so much more expensive. One, to rebuild, and two, to relocate. If you're a renter, you don't get the same money that the person whose home was just destroyed gets. The owner of the property gets paid first. They also are the ones who have to approve whether or not you can put in protective measures. So it's a massive problem set, but recommend that you take to heart that you need to be good for at minimum 3 days. But I advocate personally that you be good for at least 2 weeks. So 2 weeks of water looks like what? 2 weeks of food looks like what? What do you need for your house or wherever you end up to be good for 2 weeks? And it's important to understand you need some level of power. So the rolling out, the foldable solar mats are great. They come with little backup generators, recommend those. You can get plug-in dehumidifiers, which can give you some water access, which you can then get a life straw and you can purify it. So not to name drop or brand drop, but there are some of these that are just out there that you can buy in waves, invest in waves, buy one thing every 2 to 3 months, and over time you'll accumulate enough.
So it sounds like a key issue here is having the right data and human capital and ongoing updated analytics to make the right decisions where the weather and climate is changing and becoming less stable. What are some of those data sources or best practices to collect that are important? And then the data alone obviously isn't going to make decisions. Can you talk a bit about the human capital and how non-meteorologists can make informed strategic decisions based on this data?
Absolutely. So I strive to provide alternative sources anywhere I can. If somebody doesn't like NOAA, or if somebody doesn't want to use a particular data set when we're talking about futuristic planning or even now forecasting in the intermediate, the from now to 2 weeks out, or the 2 weeks out to 2 years out, and then the 2 years out to 10 years out, you have to find the data set that best works with them. And there are so many out there, but they all draw on very similar sources as a baseline. They just restructure the data to make it more consumable for whatever industry needs it, whatever end user they're targeting. So it's important to understand that when we say we don't need NOAA data, which is not accurate, that is the main provider of some of these models that we're building our AI off of, that we're utilizing for things like these forecasts going out on the news, that they get a lot of their information from the military weather as well as the National Weather Service. And if you strip one, you create a sole reliancy on the other. And having come through both of those from when models first came in, I was still hand drawing my weather charts when I learned weather. And I will tell you, it's not going to be pretty if we have to go back to that level of weather forecasting, but there are many of us who can. So it's never going to stop. It's about making it easily accessible for the public, easily accessible for our emergency managers, our entirety of our community of supply chain managers, site owners, site operators. They need to be able to make choices we don't even know that they're making. They're figuring out their own evacuation plans, their own load shedding plans within the energy sector. That's privatized. They're making those choices. And if we don't empower them and they make a poor choice, we, the general society, the supply chain, the economic stability of the nation are the ones who take that hit. So it only behooves us to give them as much data as is humanly possible, the best data, the most refined data, to be able to say, here is the best way to make that call. And we're all on the same page because it's coming from one centralized source, nice and cleaned up. You can repackage it however you want, but at least the validity is there. It's tested, it's tried, and it's public, which means you can go back and hind review all of that information, as opposed to them just saying, this is the forecast and then removing it, and then you being left wondering if that was the right call or not. So this keeps them accountable and it gives a lot of the information forward. So personally, I use a ton of NOAA. I use Climate Central. I use things like Tornado HQ when I want to refine the NOAA data down to just severe weather. You can go to model sources that are free and public from NOAA. Tropical Tidbits, the main owner of that website, actually went on to take a position with NOAA. And all of our climate scientists love sharing information back and forth. So it's definitely not our goal by any means to create a data set and not be able to share it, or create a study and not be able to share it. The goal is sharing. Yeah, so the National Weather Service is localized. NOAA is the parent agency. So like National Hurricane Center falls within there, for those who don't know that. The military, every branch that has flight ops, with the exception of the Army, because the Air Force does Army support, has weather. And what they do is they create weather for their sites. So we have military bases, and for example, when I started in the desert Southwest. So I did Arizona, New Mexico, southern half of California, a little bit of Texas, and through that, I started in desert forecasting. So the monsoon, I was on night shift, I did schoolwork, but in my unit, we had the University of Arizona student come in and was working with us, and they were in the atmospheric science program. He's gone on to be one of the head scientist over there at NOAA and a great friend of mine. So I love seeing that interconnect there. We got to essentially train at the same time that some of those National Weather Service people that go on through the school system go. So we're ops and they're educational when they start, and then we build, and NOAA essentially can pick between the two, but military ops are very centric. So we're looking at what ops, who's flying what type of aircraft are flying, what type of information do they care about, whereas the National Weather Service is what's going to impact people, who's going to get hurt from this, how do we advocate safety. So the military, not as much in that way, but together the news agencies are able to reach out to both and confer and then adjust their own presentation of data. Not all news agencies have meteorologists on staff. A lot of them are broadcast degrees, and thereby they need the meteorological support to be able to have that accuracy as far-reaching as possible.
So how can industry and the private sector best support these needs of the government?
So there's a surprising number of industry who have meteorologists on staff, who have an entire community of them that do forecasts for their infrastructure. And some of those meteorologists pull from NOAA, pull from military data, but they don't necessarily give back on the forecast side. We saw damage from X there, and by now we know that you will always see damage like this from this weather event. So we're missing what I lovingly refer to as a database of damage. Weather event, 4 inches in 2 hours, we know it causes flooding. What does the flooding mean for an emergency manager, for search and rescue teams in every area? It's happened enough at this point, and the intensities are only going to get worse. So we have to start creating a baseline of the last time that X many weather events have happened, these were the damages, this was how long it took to recover, the economic cost of the weather event, not just as it hits $1 billion, but for each one of them, so that the forecaster can do more than just give you some numbers for weather that you may or may not listen to, can give you the impact scope, which then empowers you to reach out to owners, operators, to say, are you ready? Are you good? Did you learn from last time? What do you need from us to shore up that response, that capability? And honestly, I think that's where AI is probably going to have the biggest hand in weather. I don't think it's going to be in forecasting weather events 2 months out. If you say it's going to rain 6 inches in 2 months, that emergency manager is still not going to take that seriously if they don't take it seriously now. So arguably, I would say it's better to create that than it is to try to shore up forecast way further forward.
So what's the so what that you'd like to leave our audience with as we wrap up the conversation today?
So I would say it's that there's far more weather data than I think people realize. World War II was the beginning of massive data set collections. Our automated weather system, our buoy system, our river flood gauges that were put in around this window of time have been collecting weather every 2 minutes since 1940 to now. That is a massive data set. That is an aggregate by site, the most hyper-localized information that you're going to find. And it's global. You can find a lot of these automated sensors in other countries. You can advocate for an installation of a micro network of them, a mesonet of them across the state. You can purchase an automated sensor. You can purchase a backyard sensor. All of this is essentially to say that there is data out there for you to have. If you know what you're looking at, you know what you're looking for, that would be the damage side of it. What can you do with that information once you have it? So if you know the bridge might wash away, what's the next step? It's really that we need 3 prongs. We need the weather forecast, we need the damage margin, and we need what can we do? And that's, I think, where everybody can lean in on, is starting to help identify that correlation between the 3.
Well, Sunny, thank you very much for being on the show today. To wrap up, how can our audience best connect with you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. I do utilize that to easily explore communication with anybody and everybody. I also have an email address, and that's sunny@unlimitedweather.com. I will be making an Unlimited Weather just accessible site of all the different tools and dashboards as they maintain, as they become available, as new ones emerge. I also host every bi-weekly an extreme weather working group. I call it the X-Wing. And through that, we're able to engage on new forecast topics. You can share best practices, products as a private sector. You can advocate for papers and research as well. So it's really an open community of scientists and industry leaders who are all just here trying to be the best responders we can be.
Well, definitely connect with and follow Sunny. Thank you very much for being on the GovDiscovery AI podcast today and sharing your insight on meteorology and U.S. national security. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the GovDiscovery AI podcast with Mike Shanley. GovDiscovery AI leverages our team's decade of experience winning federal funding to deliver federal growth intel to sales, proposal, and capture teams working in defense and civilian markets. Each market intel report is delivered by federal growth experts leveraging our proprietary deep data discovery process. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and connect with GovDiscovery AI and Mike Shanley on LinkedIn, or learn more at govdiscoveryai.com.